Picture the most powerful empire in human history, an empire that built roads stretching 250,000 miles, that fed 1 million people in a single city, that had running water, courts of law, a professional army, and a currency used from Scotland to Saudi Arabia. Now picture it ending, not with a nuclear bomb, not with a world war, not even with a great plague, but with one man, a nobody, a low-ranking foreign soldier who was owed some back pay and simply decided he wasn't leaving until he got it. His name was Odoacer, and he had absolutely no idea he was about to end Rome. To understand what Odoacer did, you first need to understand what Rome had become by the 5th century AD, because by then, the Roman Empire wasn't really Roman anymore. The legions, those legendary disciplined soldiers in red cloaks, had been slowly replaced over decades by barbarian mercenaries, Goths, Huns, Herulians, Syrians, men from the edges of the known world who fought for Rome not out of loyalty, but because Rome paid well. Odoacer was one of these men. He was born around 433 AD. His father was Edeco, a chieftain of the Syrian tribe from somewhere north of the Danube. That made Odoacer a barbarian by Roman standards, not a citizen, not a senator, just a sword for hire. He arrived in Italy as a young man, possibly as part of a tribal contingent brought in to bolster the Western Roman army. He wasn't famous. He wasn't politically connected. He was, by every available measure, unremarkable. But he was observant, and what he observed was this. The Western Roman Empire in the 470s AD was a rotting structure, not crumbling dramatically from the outside, rotting quietly from within. Emperors came and went like seasonal produce. In a single 75-year stretch, Rome had over 25 emperors in the West. Some lasted months, some lasted weeks. One lasted 69 days before being strangled by his own bodyguard. The real power didn't belong to emperors anymore. It belonged to the men commanding the armies. Men like Orestes, a Roman general of barbarian descent, who had, in 475 AD, done what ambitious Roman generals did. He deposed the sitting emperor, put his own teenage son on the throne, and declared himself the power behind it. His son's name was Romulus Augustulus, which translates with devastating irony to Little Augustus, named after the greatest emperor Rome ever had. Rome's last emperor was a teenager nicknamed Little, and Orestes, the man truly running things, made one fatal mistake. He refused to pay his barbarian soldiers. The soldiers wanted land, not gold, not titles, land. A third of Italy specifically, enough to settle, to farm, to build lives. This was not an outrageous demand. Rome had given land to soldiers before. It was standard practice, but Orestes said no. His reasoning was probably political. Giving a third of Italy to barbarian soldiers would have enraged the Roman senatorial class, the old aristocratic families who still technically owned much of the land and still believed, despite all evidence to the contrary, that Rome was Rome. So Orestes chose political optics over military reality. This was, to put it simply, an extraordinarily stupid decision, because those barbarian soldiers were the only thing standing between Rome and every other group of barbarians waiting outside the borders. The soldiers didn't petition, they didn't file a complaint. They did what soldiers who aren't paid eventually do. They found someone else to follow. That someone was Odoacer. We don't know exactly how it happened. The historical sources are frustratingly thin on the details of Odoacer's rise, but sometime in the spring of 476 AD, the barbarian soldiers of the Western Roman army chose Odoacer as their king. Not their general, not their commander, their king. This was a direct insult to Rome. Rome didn't have barbarian kings on Italian soil. That was the line. That was always the line. Odoacer crossed it without hesitating. What followed wasn't a great battle. There was no siege of Rome, no burning of the Colosseum, no moment of cinematic destruction. Odoacer marched his forces against Orestes, caught up with him at a city called Pavia, defeated him, and had him executed. Quickly, cleanly, professionally. Then he turned his attention to the teenage emperor, Romulus Augustulus, sitting in his palace in Ravenna. And here is where history takes its strangest turn. Odoacer didn't kill him. Romulus Augustulus was 16 years old. He was not a threat. He had no real power, no loyal army, no political base. He was a figurehead put on the throne by his father, and his father was already dead. So on September 4th, 476 AD, Odoacer summoned the boy emperor, relieved him of his throne, and sent him into exile in a castle in southern Italy, with a pension. A pension. The last Roman emperor in the West was fired, given a severance package, and sent to live out his days in comfortable obscurity on the coast of Campania. Odoacer then did something even more remarkable. He wrote a letter to the emperor in the East, in Constantinople, and told him that the West no longer needed its own emperor, that one emperor for the whole empire was enough, that he, Odoacer, would govern Italy as a king under Eastern authority. In one administrative letter, Odoacer dissolved 500 years of Western Roman imperial tradition, and the East, exhausted, resource-stretched, and frankly relieved, essentially wrote back, "Fine." Here is the part that should genuinely disturb you. Nobody rang a bell. There was no announcement, no ceremony of collapse, no moment where Romans gathered in the Forum and said, "Well, that's it then. Empire's over." Life continued. The Senate kept meeting. The courts kept operating. Taxes kept being collected. The roads didn't crumble overnight. The aqueducts still flowed. In a village in Gaul, a farmer woke up on September 5th, 476 AD, and did exactly what he did on September 3rd. He had no idea the empire had ended, and even if someone had told him, he might have shrugged, because for him, the empire had already been a distant, increasingly irrelevant thing for decades. The truth is that Rome didn't fall on a specific day. It dissolved, slowly, over generations, like a body that's been sick for years finally going still, and the family standing around the bed arguing about exactly when it really happened. Historians in the East barely noted Romulus Augustulus' deposition at the time. The writer Marcellinus Comes mentioned it in just a few sentences. Others didn't mention it at all. The significance of 476 AD as the fall of Rome was largely assigned in retrospect by later historians, centuries after the fact, looking for a clean date to put in a textbook. The people who lived through it didn't experience a fall. They experienced a gradual, uncomfortable change, from Roman to something that didn't have a name yet. So what actually ended the Roman Empire? Was it the barbarian invasions, the economic collapse, the political chaos, the over-reliance on mercenary soldiers? Yes, all of it, slowly, over centuries. But if you want a single moment, a single man, the closest you'll find is a barbarian soldier from north of the Danube who was owed back pay, got tired of waiting, and decided to take matters into his own hands. Odoacer didn't set out to end Rome. He set out to get what his soldiers were promised. He probably went to sleep on September 4th, 476 AD, thinking about logistics, about feeding his men, about securing the borders, about his next letter to Constantinople. He didn't think, "Today I ended Western civilization." And that's the most unsettling thing about the fall of Rome. It wasn't destroyed by a conqueror with a grand vision. It wasn't brought down by an unstoppable force of nature. It was ended by paperwork, by a teenager being sent to the coast, by a letter that said, "We don't need an emperor anymore," and an Eastern court too tired to argue. The most powerful empire the world had ever seen ended not with a war cry, but with a shrug.